For us, talking season means reacting season. SEC Media Days are underway here in Nashville, but we're still reeling from Brent Venables' slight toward Miami. It might seem like it came out of nowhere, but we'll tell you what's really behind this. Plus, resolution from the NCAA toward Tennessee and former head coach Jeremy Pruitt, what it means for the Vols recruiting now and in the future. And a State of the Union for the back-to-back national champs. Will Kirby Smart add the best recruiting class of all time to his growing resume? We'll bring on an expert to discuss all that and more as the College Football Recruiting Show starts right now. Alongside Blair and Gulo, I am Emily Proud. A reminder to submit your questions in the chat. The only way you can do that, though, is if you are a subscriber of the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Do that. Also, please like this video so we know that you're watching. Blair, it is the final week of the dead period, but I would describe the rapid-fire commitments that we've been seeing lately as anything but dead. So what actually changes come next week?
July 25th is the beginning of a quiet period, which allows a lot of recruits to be able to get back on campuses and make in-person contact with college coaches. So I'm expecting a flood of campus visits as coaches and players and everyone starts to build relationships heading into the season.
So it's not dead and it's not going to be quiet. Interesting. Let's go ahead and hit some of the headlines that have happened in the world of recruiting. And it seems like all is good in Cane Country. Miami jumping to the top 15 of the team recruiting rankings over the weekend with a pair of four-star commitments. JoJo Trader and defensive lineman Artavius Jones. That now makes 18 commits this cycle for Mario Cristobal. But Blair, what do the latest additions add to this surging class?
Emily, this gives Miami some more in-state buzz. JoJo Trader is now the top-rated commit in this class and a big play threat from anywhere on the field. And Jones is a strong and mobile defensive lineman, giving the Canes double-digit commitments in the Sunshine State.
Early this morning on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, the #1 player in the state of Hawaii announced his commitment to Nebraska. That's four-star offensive lineman Preston Taumua picking the Huskers over Bama, Auburn, Arizona, and Oregon. What does this ad mean to Rule's rebuild?
Emily, first it means that Matt Rule had to stay up until 1 a.m. Nebraska time to watch that commitment reveal. But in all seriousness, this is a huge win on two fronts. It gives the Huskers a major building block along the offensive line, and it extends the reach into the West region, the first pledge for the Huskers on this side of the Rockies.
Yeah, shout out to the hundreds of Huskers fans who tuned in early this morning to watch that. Meanwhile, the Tigers landing a commitment from four-star cornerback Jalen Crawford. Tigers could really mean anyone, but in this case, it's Auburn beating out another Tiger in LSU. So who did Hugh Freeze just get?
A highly competitive cover corner. He thrives in one-on-one matchups. Should give Auburn a capable defender who can draw the opponent's best wide receiver. There's a lot to like about Auburn's defensive backhaul with 3 four-star prospects already on board, and Jalen Crawford can be considered the headliner in that group.
Whew, all sounds good there. Well, news surrounding the Vols, however, has not been the most positive lately. But our director of recruiting, Steve Wiltfong, giving a little gift to Tennessee fans late last week. A crystal ball for the Big Orange to land this guy, 5-star wide receiver Micah Matthews. He will announce his official decision this Wednesday at 7 o'clock Eastern. So let's get into it a little bit more. It's time now for the Wiltfong Whip Around with our director of recruiting, Steve Wiltfong. Steve, in addition to Tennessee, his finalists include Clemson, Georgia, and USC. So what has you leaning Josh Heupel and his crew for the 5-star receiver, Micah Matthews?
Well, Mike almost announced his decision this past weekend, sharing the stage with his teammate, top 247 cornerback Jalen Crawford, who, as you guys said at the top of the show, obviously committed to Auburn. So he's ready. He and his family have been very thorough with their process, took several visits to Clemson, several to Tennessee, been to Georgia a ton, went out to USC twice. So they got a great feel for each school, and I believe these programs were all places Mike could see himself, and his parents liked them as well. But going into the announcement, I obviously like Tennessee. You know, it's a place where he's talked about the players and the coaches and constantly pushing to be the best. A program that's on the rise. He was there when they ripped the goalpost down and beat Alabama. He returned in the spring, took his official visit where he got a chance to spend time with Hendon Hooker, who was back on campus, among obviously getting a chance to hang out with the players on the team. Him and his family have talked about the culture and the stability of that program under Coach Heupel and company. Then, of course, it doesn't hurt that they had the #1 total offense last year, #1 scoring offense last year, and #1 passing efficiency offense in the country. So he sees big-time potential within that offense in Knoxville. But Clemson has certainly given him a lot to think about over the course of several visits. Georgia's still battling for him. I think there was times where USC had momentum, so it will be exciting going into Wednesday's decision. But Tennessee pushing for a second straight top 10 class. Mike Matthews would be a big addition in trying to get there.
Mike Matthews isn't the only top flight wide receiver that Tennessee is in on. They're also trying to fight the likes of Alabama and Georgia for Amari Jefferson. He's an in-state prospect from Chattanooga. What are you hearing, Steve, on the star player as we approach the August 5th announcement date?
Yeah, 3 finalists, Alabama, Georgia, or Tennessee. I think it'll ultimately be Alabama or Tennessee. As we talk today, I like where the Crimson Tide stand for him, but he's going to take one more visit to Alabama and one more visit to Tennessee the last weekend of July. So we'll see if things change. We saw Tennessee kind of rally for in-state linebacker Arian Carter last year. Alabama was the team to beat for much of that process, but Tennessee was able to come from behind and win for Arian Carter. So I am not ruling them out for Amari Jefferson, who at one point thought he was going to attend Tennessee and play baseball. So it's a place he loves, and the ball is still alive in that one. But I like where Alabama stands going into one more round of visits.
In more wide receiver news, the fight for 5-star Micah Hudson still seems to be a Texas Tech versus Texas battle. Now, while the Red Raiders currently have your crystal ball pick, Steve, the Longhorns not giving up in this race. So what's the latest with his recruitment?
Yeah, and Mike Roach had an update on the Lake Belton standout out of Temple, Texas there over the weekend as well. But I think that Texas A&M is doing what they can to make a move here late in the process. He looked like he was all set for Joey McGuire and company. He was back on the Texas Tech campus, I heard this past weekend, hanging out with players on the team. It wasn't a recruiting visit or whatever, but just look, this is a young man that feels like he really fits in with the players at Texas Tech, loves the direction of the program, loves the new staff there, but Texas A&M trying to chip away as they put together what is perhaps going to be in the mix for one of the nation's best receiver classes as well. You know, they recently beat Auburn, among others, for Cameron Coleman, beat USC for Draylon Miller, and they're definitely in the mix here for Micah Hudson late, and maybe they beat LSU for speedster Jelani Watkins as well.
We mentioned earlier on the show that the dead period is coming to a close, and we're expecting a bit more activity this coming weekend. A couple 4-star linebackers are set to come off the board, Steve. First, it's Edwin Spillman from Nashville. He is announcing this Friday, the 21st. It's Tennessee versus Ohio State. What's the buzz?
I like Tennessee here for Edwin Spillman and have for a long time. I've had a 24/7 Sports crystal ball logged in favor of the Vols since October. He's been a regular on campus. His older brother is part of the football program. And in conversations in the past with Edwin Spillman, he's talked about that culture turning around under Coach Heupel and company, and just the family feel he gets every time he's on campus. Certainly Ohio State's a place that's given a lot of prospects something to think about this cycle, but I like where Tennessee stands for Edwin Spillman.
After him, California linebacker Kingston Viliamu-Asa will make his decision on Sunday, the 23rd. It's down to Ohio State, Notre Dame, and USC for the St. John Bosco 4-star. So what's the latest there?
Well, our colleague Greg Biggins has been on top of this recruitment, and but talking to sources with regarding Kingston today, he is going to go on a church retreat this week where he's going to be able to think about his college decision. And Greg Biggins and I both think that this could still go 3 ways. You got Notre Dame, you got Ohio State, and you got USC in the mix here. I think that Notre Dame has led at various points in this process, gotten him to South Bend several times. It's a place he's very comfortable. I think Ohio State has made a later move here. That official visit the weekend of June 23rd was massive in this process, and USC has never gone away. He continues to have regular dialogue with that coaching staff. A great conversation, I'm told, yesterday. This is one that could still go three different ways. These are three of the best recruiting classes in the country. This is one of the most coveted linebackers in the land, and he could still end up with any one of them.
Going to be a fascinating announcement to see where Kingston Viliamuasa decides to play his college ball. Steve, Wisconsin continued to roll over the weekend. They got a commitment from four-star running back Dylan Jones. He had over 30 scholarship offers, and the Maryland native now is headed to Madison. What is Luke Fickell getting in the top 24/7 ball carrier?
Well, Michigan and Notre Dame are two schools that have arguably the best running back class in the country, but you need to include Wisconsin in that fold here as they added Dylan Jones to Darian Dupree, and then the big physical running back out of the same part of the country there in Gideon Atuka. But obviously you see the highlights there for Dylan Jones there, and he can hit the home run between the tackles, outside on the perimeter. He can catch the football. He's also a standout wrestler and track and field guy. He's a ferocious blocker. And Wisconsin with Dupree and Dylan Jones here as your kind of every down interchangeable backs. I think that's a special duo as they remake that running back room. Wisconsin has a fantastic offensive line class in the fold as well. So Luke Fickell and the Badgers' first coaching staff, or first recruiting class here, first full recruiting class here in Madison is terrific. In the running back position is where I would start as I highlight what they've done here so far in 2024.
Yeah, so don't worry. It's not all going to be air raid there. They still got some good backs and a good offensive line like we know and love from Wisconsin. Got a few viewer questions here for you, Steve. The first one is from JBHH. He wants to know where the five-star linebacker Justin Williams is with his recruitment. I see you got a crystal ball in for Oregon, but what can you tell us about him?
Yeah, I think he's heavy trending towards Georgia. Continue to have conversations with people behind the scenes, but I think the visits to Georgia here at the end of the spring, or maybe that was early summer, and then his official visit in June has completely changed where this recruitment stands. He was also back at Eugene, but this is the strongest I've felt about Georgia here. We've talked about him almost every week on this show. But this is the strongest I've felt about Georgia's position right now. Oregon's not going to go away here, but I think Georgia has the momentum with Justin Williams as they look to add to 24/7 Sports #1 ranked recruiting class.
Steve, two names that are very popular among the viewer questions every week, it seems like every show. Brandon Baker, Aiden Breland, the five-star teammates from Mater Dei. I caught up with Brandon Baker this past weekend out in Orange County. He said he watches the show. So, Brandon, if you're watching, we're going to talk about you again. What's the latest, Steve, on Aiden Breland and Brandon Baker?
Well, I think we like where Oregon stands with both of them, but they have major competition for both prospects. When you talk about Brandon Baker, you know, he continues to have regular dialogue with Ohio State. Justin Fry and company pushing hard there. Had a good official visit to Texas where he spent time with Kyle Flood in the Longhorns. Miami is a program that has been in the mix for a while there. So those are some of the schools to keep an eye on for Brandon Baker. And then Aiden Breland, you know, Oregon is a school that's been mentioned a lot there, but Georgia, Texas A&M got official visits in June. Miami, I feel like there's times where we feel like they have a lot of momentum with him. Sometimes not sure. But I think they're in the middle of it for Aiden Breland as well. He's enjoyed his time in Coral Gables. I'm not sure. I think Oregon is the one that I would predict ultimately lands Brandon Baker. With Aiden Breland, I'm not as comfortable saying like one school I think ultimately lands him right now.
All right. And Brandon Baker, if you're watching, make sure you hit that like button. And if you're not Brandon Baker, also go ahead and hit that like button. We'd love to hear from you. Got another question here. Hannah wants to know, is three-star safety out of Utah, Davis Andrews, still leaning Notre Dame?
Yeah, and Blair Angulo just put in a 24/7 Sports crystal ball in favor of the Irish for Davis Andrews, as did our Notre Dame insider Tom Lloyd. But talking to Davis myself in the past about the Irish, I know that the program that he's been super high on has been to campus several times. Yeah, he told me recently that he was also looking at UCLA, BYU, and Utah. But I just think his time spent up in South Bend and the magnitude of that program and the games that they play in and the environment and the degree are things that speak to him about Notre Dame. And he also really fits in with the guys in the locker room, the players that he's been around.
Okay, I have to ask, Blair, you put in the crystal ball 7 days ago. Anything to add here?
Yeah, it did make it seem right that Notre Dame had really kind of grasped the momentum there when we put in those crystal ball predictions. Utah, BYU were two others that were making a strong push. This one sounds like it could end by the end of the month. He wants to make a decision soon, so watch out for the Irish here. This is a player who intends to go on a church mission, so he wouldn't be on campus until the 2026 season, but obviously, guys, a highly coveted and a big-time safety prospect from the state of Utah, worth the wait, I would assume, for Notre Dame and for other programs that are still after his signature.
Right.
Yeah, him and Gatlin Bear. Definitely want to wait on those guys.
Definitely worth the wait. Steve, thank you so much for being on the show. Another reminder, if you want to read more of his work, head to 247sports.com. And as always, for more exclusive information, highly recommend you become a VIP member. Blair, it is talkin' season. The Big 12 kicked off media days last week. The SEC has taken over our home city of Nashville this week. We will, of course, bring you coverage from that event. But first, we gotta react to the words from a future SEC head coach. That is Oklahoma's Brent Venables, throwing some really not so subtle shade at Miami. Check it out.
6 and 7, none of it's any good, right? But had we gotten blown out by a Middle Tennessee,
right?
Had we gotten beat by Florida State 45-3,
right?
The conversation's probably a little different.
Yikes. Blair, a lot of people are looking at this and saying this came out of nowhere. I mean, what is this Oklahoma versus Miami feud? But if we're reading the recruiting tea leaves here, why do you think that this kind of makes sense?
Emily, we love to read the recruiting tea leaves, and I think this is just another example of a coach, in this case being Brent Venables, maybe fighting some negative recruiting that has been going around, right? I think he is very open about potentially being a program that's, in a way, kind of on a hot seat, right? Maybe not the greatest first season or first year with that program, so probably having to answer a lot of questions. But it's interesting, right, that he goes after Miami because they've been on some head-to-head battles right now with the Hurricanes. They landed Devon Mitchell, the tight end from California, via the state of Texas, who reclassified recently to the 2024 class. You also got Jaden Jackson, who announced with us here on the show recently. They beat out Miami for the IMG Academy defensive lineman. And they're also after David Stone, who is a player from IMG Academy, one of the best defensive linemen in the country. And I would assume, and based on those words, that Brent Venables isn't going to back down, and he isn't going to, I think, go out silently. I think he wants to continue fighting, and the words are true, right? It's always be recruiting. We might be in the month of July. We might be during the heaviness of media days, but it's always about sending the message to recruits that, hey, look, we did this, we did that, and these other schools are also doing this and that. So, let's not just focus on our own negativity. Let's, kind of maybe point some fingers to some other schools. So that was very interesting.
And there's definitely a history between these two, top flight recruiters back with Alabama and Clemson, and then, of course, the connections most recently in the ACC. So it is easy to kind of connect those dots, but when you put it out in black and white like that and say that they are going after the same recruits and have had this back and forth, that makes a little bit more sense. Let's go back to this week's action in the SEC. Greg Sankey hit the podium today to talk all things college football, but as it pertains to recruiting in particular, his comments on NIL were interesting.
Future student athletes, those who right now might be 15 or 16 or 17 years old, they deserve something better than to need to sort through a fully unregulated marketplace, being approached by individuals who present themselves as something that they may not be, where anyone can purchase card stock and run it through a printer and call themselves an agent on a business card, and then engage in making offers to young people that are neither transparent, that do not include protections that many of us would expect to be normal. It makes it difficult for young people to both understand and navigate this free-for-all as they're trying to make life-guiding and life-changing decisions. To our knowledge, no state has taken action to enforce its own state laws around name, image, and likeness activity.
Now, Sankey did add that NIL has been, quote, a net positive for young people. But you, Blair, talk to recruits and their families all the time. How big of an issue is what he's describing between, these actors that are pretending to be agents and having some of that confusion?
I think Sankey brings up a good point, and I think it's something that I think a lot of recruits are still figuring out. We are in uncharted territory, and a lot of recruits and their families have a ton of questions. They don't know how to navigate this space yet because it hasn't really been done. All they can really go off of is what they hear from, people close to them, or like he mentioned, right, some of those agents or those NIL collectives that are trying to attain their services and their signatures and in a way maybe kind of push a recruit to a certain school. So there's a lot of different question marks. There's a lot of space that maybe hasn't been explored, and I think right now it's about finding those answers, finding out what's true, what might not be true, and whether or not certain situations could affect a recruit's maybe decision or the way they go about the process. So I think for now there's more questions than there are answers, and as we move forward, I think there has to be a bit more clarity because these parents, these recruits, they're scuffling a bit. They're trying to figure out what's real, what might not be real, what they're signing up for, where they are signing on the dotted line and what that means. I think all of that needs to be a little bit more clear.
And these bad actors can sometimes dominate the conversation, but he did go back, as I said, to saying that this has overall been a good thing and there has been great opportunity for athletes that wasn't normally there. He did offer a potential suggestion on how all of this gets solved.
I think there's also been an ongoing effort to deem student athletes as employees of institutions or conferences or the NCAA. I have yet to have a conversation with an engaged, participating student athlete who says they want to be deemed an employee of their institution or the conference. Efforts like those that have happened in California, mandating revenue, create new threats around the support of Olympic and women's sports. The bill that was introduced that has been delayed failed to adequately recognize the existing requirements of Title IX, and we were pleased to see the engagement and the efforts of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee to share their concerns along with the Women's Sports Foundations. Efforts to simply upend the collegiate model place in jeopardy the opportunities for thousands of student athletes for decades to come. The reality is, only Congress can fully address the challenges facing college athletics. The NCAA cannot fix all of these issues. The courts cannot resolve all of these issues. The states cannot resolve all of these issues, nor can the conferences. Whether congressional action is achievable is a matter of debate.
Pretty clear when he says Congress isn't the only ones that can solve this issue. What are your thoughts on their involvement in solving NIL and all the challenges that college football is currently facing?
Yeah, from a recruiting perspective, I think it would gain and it would allow these recruits to gain that clarity, right? It would eliminate a lot of the gray area. And from a congressional standpoint, if they're able to maybe make some laws or bylaws or set some standards about specific deals or, employment or things like that of that nature, I think it only helps the schools, the institutions, and the recruits to find out where that gray area is, what is black and what is white, where they might be signing, whether or not that's a real logistical thing that makes sense for them. So I think Congress in a way has to act to give recruits and give their families a little bit more clarity, but also I think it protects the colleges and protects the institutions that maybe are going through some of these business deals to kind of assure that both sides are getting the accurate and the good, in a way, the good product of what these deals could be.
Just really looking for that standardization of everything. When you have all these different states doing different things, it makes the most sense to have that federal regulation to come in and make all the rules the same. I have to ask about something that he said earlier on in that clip, though, on athletes potentially being employees, and that he's never had a conversation with a student athlete who've said that they want this. Why is this such a complicated issue right now on athletes potentially being employees, whether that's from their school or potentially a league and a conference?
I think that means that if you're an employee, you are locked in, right? Employees sign contracts and they sign multi-year deals. And what would that eliminate for a lot of prospects? Basically the transfer portal, right? Like if you're signing a contract out of high school for 3-4 years, and you have to get out of that contract, there's ramifications, right? There are it's a result of something that maybe something has to be given up for you to get out of a contract. So I think that's the biggest issue right now when you think about employment and when you think about players maybe locking in a certain amount of years for a school. It would protect the school, right? They go and sign a big time player and they know that they're going to have him for a couple years or for however many years they sign him as an employee. But I think the the employee in this sense, loses a lot of their rights, a lot of their ability to maybe make a different decision or move along or find a different fit. What if you're stuck in the depth chart behind a couple guys and you want to go play somewhere else, or you maybe didn't like the place that you ended up at? I think employment would affect the ability for you to make a pivot and make a change.
That's the key. I think the conversation surrounding employment always goes towards the financial side of things and the payment and that sort of thing. But when you have that employee-employer relationship, there's a level of control. And that's, I think, the scary thought to a lot of student athletes out there and trying to have that delicate balance of they have control, but then also the employer, whoever that is, has the same amount of control. So a lot of complicated issues. I know it seems like college football, doom and gloom, but that was just kind of the theme of Greg Sankey's talk today and all the problems that need some solving. But it is interesting to dig in some of those bigger picture questions. We do it all the time here on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. So make sure that you hit that subscribe button if you have not already. A lot of you have, though, 116,000. We do not take that number for granted. You all are just amazing. This is an appreciation post right now. I mean, we get to keep coming back every day because you hit that like button and do this show that we all love to do. Hopefully you love it as well. So if you're not already, come be a part of it. Highly, highly recommend. Let's transition here. The dark cloud hanging over the Tennessee football program, I'll say cleared on Friday. The NCAA reached a verdict and the penalties, they're far from sunshine for the Vols, though. This resolution dates back to 2020 when former head coach Jeremy Pruitt was fired for cause, launching an investigation into recruiting violations by Pruitt and his staff. Let's take a look at some of those penalties that he was issued. That includes a 6-year show cause for Pruitt and a 7-year show cause penalties for 7 other staff members. There is an $8 million fine, a loss of scholarships, recruiting visits, a whole lot more in here. But the one bright spot is no postseason ban. That was, of course, something that Pruitt himself was pushing for. So let's dig a little bit deeper on this issue with our Ryan Callahan of Go Vols 24/7. Ryan, the penalties will certainly hurt the wallet, but it seems like Tennessee's proactivity maybe lessen the blow here. How do you view this while recognizing the hits, but also seeing that this can maybe be considered avoiding disaster to a certain extent?
Yeah, I think you don't want to look at it in just terms of wins and losses, but I think this is a win overall for Tennessee, considering what the downside could have been. I think the main objective for Tennessee once this whole process started was finding a way to avoid a postseason ban. I think there was a lot of confidence at different times that wasn't going to happen, a lot of optimism certainly throughout the process that wasn't going to happen. But just to know that's no longer on the table is the most important thing to Tennessee by far in this whole process. So they can now put those concerns aside for any recruits that might have had them. They can start to put this all behind them. And they've got some things that'll make them uncomfortable in some spots that we'll get into more in a minute. But in the grand scheme of things, all of this has to be considered a win for Tennessee because the severity of the violations that they were dealing with left open the possibility of a postseason ban, and now they can put that in the rearview mirror and say that's definitely not going to be an issue, and no one we're recruiting has to think about that.
In regards to recruiting, Ryan, a reduction of scholarships, a reduction of official visits and unofficial visits, they're reducing communication and evaluation periods as well. That's all been shortened. Of these various penalties, which one do you think will affect Tennessee the most in the short term?
Well, again, I think Tennessee will happily deal with any of these over the postseason ban, but I think each of them could cause a little bit of discomfort in different ways. If I had to pick just one, the scholarship reductions gets a lot of attention, obviously, but Tennessee's in a pretty good spot to absorb that when they have to lose 28 scholarships over a 5-year period. They've already reduced 16, and most people didn't even realize it was happening. They took 13 of those in year one under Josh Heupel because of all the players that left in the transfer portal. They just sort of absorbed that right out of the gate. So that'll be 2 or 3 scholarships fewer per year over the next few years. That's not a huge deal, especially in the transfer portal era when so many players are leaving each offseason. I don't think they'll feel that one very much. So I would say unofficial visits. I could see that one being a little bit of a headache at times. They have to lose 10 games where they can't host unofficial visitors. They've already done 2 of those over the past couple of years, but that's 8 more still. 4 of them have to be SEC games. So there's still plenty of non-marquee games on your schedule, but at some point that's going to be a conflict for maybe a player across the country or in Florida who could only make it in during his team's open date. At some point that's probably going to cause them to miss out on a visit here or there. So I would say that, just because it is so hard sometimes to get players on campus from across the country.
So that's the short-term ramifications. There is, of course, a 5-year probationary period for the program. That's when the reductions and the penalties will take full effect. But beyond the 5-year span, how big of an impact will this have on the Vols' long-term recruiting?
I think very little as far as negative impact. I think in a lot of ways, I've kind of said this throughout the process, the investigation and the period of the uncertainty is the worst part of this. And probably most other schools who've been through this would tell you the same thing, that when you don't know, you don't have that final ruling or the certainty in the situation to tell recruits, that part's the worst, because then your opponents get to fill in the blanks. They get to tell other players what the worst case scenario could be, and you have to spend a lot of time answering questions and dealing with that and trying to shoot that down when you don't still have certainty. Now they have some certainty. They can go take that to recruits, and anyone who has questions about it, they can assure them, no, there's no postseason ban. This scholarship reduction is not really going to impact the quality of players we're able to bring in over the next few years. So they're able to now point to something and say, this is what we're dealing with. We have a plan completely in place for how to handle it, and this isn't going to affect our ability to go forward and compete for championships, and that's the most important thing. So I don't think this hurts Tennessee's recruiting much at all. Again, it's something coaches will have to deal with here and there, but I don't think overall it's going to affect the level of players Tennessee is able to attract, and it certainly won't discourage any players from coming to Tennessee.
Josh Heupel and his staff have really turned things around within the program, and I think the expectations have been raised. The fan base now, I think, it looks at this program and what they're capable of a little bit differently than when he arrived. But what is the pulse, Ryan, of this fan base when they look at these penalties and these potential ramifications?
I think for fans, in some ways, it's a lot like the coaches. They're just glad to have this over with. Everyone's kind of been waiting for the other shoe to drop for 2 years, and now they can kind of finally put behind them the Jeremy Pruitt era and sort of the mess that Josh Heupel inherited more than 2 years ago. And it's already been kind of it's looked like a bright future for this program for the past year, especially. And now I think fans can sort of actually buy into that and know that there's not something else that's waiting around the corner that might present some issues at some point. They can now worry about just continuing to improve the talent level across the roster and competing with the teams at the top of the SEC where they think they're in that mix now. There shouldn't be anything really holding them back now with this out of the way.
Yeah, just good to have that resolution, move on, and look ahead. Ryan, thank you for breaking it all down for us. Be sure to read the great work from Ryan and the whole crew at GoVols 24/7. It's an especially good time to lock into their coverage with, of course, SEC Media Days kicking off this week. Josh Heupel is set to speak on Thursday, and GoVols 24/7 will be all over it. July has been a little slower, I'd say, recruiting-wise for the Dogs. But, man, has Georgia been adding some big bodies across the offensive line. 3 of their 5 commitments this month have come from that very position. And the trio, you're looking at them, they have an average size of over 6'6", 353 pounds. That is a lot of mass. That should certainly work in the SEC. But just to be sure, let's ask our Georgia expert who is here in studio with me, Jordan Hill. From Dogs 24/7, you're here for SEC Media Days. Where do you attribute this increased attention toward building up that position group as of late?
I think a lot of credit is due to Stacy Searles, which it's funny on the website to see old board posts when he was hired. A lot of fans didn't really know what to expect. Stacy had been with Mark Richt back in his time in Athens. There was a lot of questions about the job Stacy could do on the recruiting trail, and I think he's proven it in this class alone. They've got 6 commits on the offensive line. Emily, you talked about how much size they've got, several 4-stars among them. They've done such a good job reloading at this position, and it adds to what is a really, really special 2024 class that, we're in July, in the middle of July. They got 26 commits. Yeah. You don't see that often. Stacy Searles deserves a lot of credit, but a lot of the people up and down that staff have done a very, very good job in putting this class together.
You probably feel pretty good about the staying power of this group too, right? With the upcoming season and the high expectations and everything that come with it. You bring those guys on campus and they're seeing a lot of wins this fall.
Right. I mean, I think that's a big reason why you've seen so many decide, June, July to go ahead and get this thing over with. And, I think a lot of credit is due just to the job that Kirby Smart and company have done these last few years. Those early classes, it was about selling a goal and, shooting for the moon. Well, then you win back-to-back national championships and you send a ton of guys to the NFL. It makes their job so much easier. So they've backed up what they've been selling to kids across the country, much less just in the state of Georgia. It's paid off and paid huge dividends. And you look at the 2024 class and Georgia fans are excited, but they're also already like, hey, who's in the 25 class, who's in the 26 class? They expect this kind of staying power with this class and the ones that are coming up.
I have to imagine when Kirby Smart enters some of those living rooms, all he has to do is say, scoreboard, check it out. We're winning back-to-back national championships and are favored to do it again with a three-peat. We've mentioned that this is very early on in the process. It is just July, but there is the talk of Georgia potentially topping that historic 2022 A&M class. But this class is filling up. You talked about 26 total commits, though, so how much more wiggle room is there in this class to potentially make history?
That is the ultimate question, and it's the one that our entire staff is sort of doing the numbers and trying to figure out. And there's a number of big targets that they're still going after, and Steve Wiltfong on this show hit on several of those guys, Mike Matthews, Amari Jefferson, Aiden Breland, some of the other big names that they're going after. They have room, I think, to add, 4 or 5 other guys. There's a few guys that are on board right now that we don't anticipate that by the end of when these guys sign to wind up sticking with Georgia, which gives them a little bit more room. But they've got several guys they're still going after. It's going to be interesting to see how long some of these recruitments play out if they really go into the fall. And maybe they make our lives easier. And by the time we get to that December signing day, we already know who all is coming to Athens and who is just waiting to make it official and put pen to paper.
Yeah, but we love the flips here on this show. It certainly makes things exciting, but for all the dog fans watching right now, I know that you want to just stick with the awesome class that you already have now. And we cannot talk about Georgia recruiting without talking about the #1 player in the class and the quarterback. Will you tell me his name, please? Because apparently we've been pronouncing this wrong.
Dylan Raiola. It's a very common mistake, so
okay.
don't get hung up on it. But yeah, it's funny to... there was so much hope for him to jump in and join this Georgia class. He's done that, and I think it's been so interesting to follow how much recruiting he's been doing. You'll see it on social media. You'll hear it from other players. Benjamin Wolk, who covers recruiting for us at Dogs 24/7, will be talking to other recruits, and they'll mention, yeah, Dylan's blowing up my phone all the time. And that's what you want if you're Kirby Smart. You've got the #1 player in this class. And not only has he pledged to Georgia, he's doing everything he can to add to this class. So he's the exact kind of guy you want to be sort of the face of this class. And he seems to be working just about as hard as Kirby and really the entire staff in trying to add to this class.
All right, Dylan Raiola. We got it right. He's also helping Kirby Smart on the recruiting trail a lot closer to Kirby Smart now. He makes the transfer from Arizona to Buford. How does that affect his development as he gets ready for his freshman season?
Well, I'll tell you for sure that tickets for Friday night in Buford, you probably first come, first serve, because there are going to be a lot of Georgia fans. But I think the biggest thing for him, I think it is going to help with his adjustment, just coming from the West Coast. That's a pretty significant move. And, the thing that Georgia fans are really excited about, it's been quite a while since they've signed a kid from Buford. I don't think anyone's really going to count Dylan and say, hey, we got a Buford kid finally. But there's guys like KJ Bolden, who's a 5-star safety that they're after really hard. A few other guys in future classes that, it's certainly not going to hurt Georgia's chances having dealing with those guys. I'm sure that he's bringing it up all the time that, hey, you can follow me to Athens and come help us out. So as far as his development, I think the biggest thing is he gets to the state of Georgia a little bit earlier, pretty much just up the road from Athens. And, maybe we'll see a few years down the road if he's able to get some of those Buford Wolves to follow him to Sanford Stadium.
Yeah, we'll see if he opens up a new pipeline there. Jordan, thank you so much for joining us here in studio. I know you got a busy week ahead of you, so be sure that you were checking out the great work that him and the whole crew are doing at Dogs 24/7. He will bring you coverage from Kirby Smart's media availability. That is tomorrow. So check out Dogs 24/7 for his coverage and all things Georgia all year long.
Guy is a blur on tape. He zigs and zags.
You see size, you see length, you see athleticism.
He's a player that has that opportunity to potentially make an impact from day one.
Kevin Levy, you are our 24/7 sports recruit of the weekend. Where there is a will, there's a Piscataway. That's what I assume Greg Schiano and the Scarlet Knights are saying after landing this three-star athlete out of Florida. Levy picking Rutgers over the likes of Florida State, Louisville, Kentucky, and Illinois. That's commitment number 6 out of the Sunshine State for Rutgers. So Blair, what does Schiano get with this latest addition?
Some serious speed, and that's what you go to Florida to get. Levy posted 9 sub-11 second times in the 100-meter last year as a sophomore. He's only going to get faster. He had some really good two-way production as well. Can play some receiver, as we see here. But it sounds like Rutgers likes him on the defensive side of the ball, either at corner or at safety. That's exactly what you hope to have at that position, that speed, that length, the player that can catch up to big-time wide receivers down the field. And I think this is a really good addition because this allows Rutgers to bring in a player that they can develop, right? There's a guy in our office who probably doesn't want to hear this, but Rutgers is not going to be in many battles for 4 stars and 5 stars. It's just not going to happen. This is in their wheelhouse, getting a 3-star with upside and with traits. And Kevin Levy is a player they can bring along and develop as a capable starter. So he definitely fits that mold, and he fits the mold as our recruit of the weekend.
What do you make of this Schiano success in the Sunshine State? And say that 5 times fast.
I think it's remarkable, right? You go in there because you try to add, really good athletes and really good speed to your class. And I think that's been one downfall for Rutgers when you are playing in the Big Ten is, maybe not matching up from an athlete to athlete standpoint and going up against the Ohio States, which, by the way, goes into the state of Florida quite a bit to get their big time wide receivers. Michigan is on the rise, Wisconsin, Penn State, even Nebraska now going out nationally to bring in athletes with track times. Rutgers has to do more of this, and it's, I think, if you're a Rutgers fan, a pretty remarkable thing to see, to go out there and get half a dozen players from down the coast in the state of Florida to potentially help you win some football games.
Not too shabby. I assume that that's a pretty tough sell, to move up from Florida to New Jersey, but the Big 12 or the Big 10 is expanding, and so there's going to be some games over in Southern California that will certainly feel nice to those Florida natives. We got one viewer question here that we want to hit before we head out. Christian asking, this is kind of interesting. Michigan has 8 defensive line commitments right now. Do you expect anyone to reopen their recruitment? It seems like a lot, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to name any names specifically because 8 is a lot. You look at a certain class, it's usually 4 or 5, maybe 6. But to have 8, you are, I think, in a way kind of stretching things out. But, maybe that's a huge need for Michigan in this class. They needed big guys up front that can make plays on the football. And, odds on that probably all 8 of them don't stick. I think this is recruiting. I think we've all done this for a number of years now to realize that it's going to be difficult to hang on to all those players. But I think right now you like what Michigan's done. They've addressed some needs. They have some big time playmakers. They won a big recruiting battle for Jaden Davis. So maybe we're nitpicking here and just finding a reason to, maybe look at some negative aspects. 8 defensive linemen. I think there's probably some bigger problems to have if you're a Michigan Wolverines fan. But yeah, that's going to be a lot of commitments. But we'll see if they all stick.
Yeah, certainly a good problem to have. And man, Michigan, I just feel like over the last couple of years, it was, they're not doing enough. Why are they not, right outside the top 15 in recruiting? Now they're kicking butt and they have too many defensive linemen. So you win some, you lose some. And it seems like Jim Harbaugh cannot win any of them right now, but that's all right. Thank you guys for tuning in and for sending that great question. We do appreciate it. One more ask to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a moment, and that very simple thumbs up button, the like button. Thank you so much for watching. For Blair and Gulo, I'm Emily Proud, and this is the College Football Recruiting Show.